much for coming to this. We have a great turnout. I can't, we've done this for several years now. I've lost track of how many years we do this. And this is our spring book news. I also want to introduce a new adult services librarian, Rachel Murray, and she's joined the book news crew, and she's got some great nonfiction and fiction books to tell you about. So as always, I've divided the program thematically because it's just easier for everybody. And so we're going to start with history, and I even put some quotes in. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. So take it away.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here. As Sara said, I'm Rachel Murray. Just to give you a little bit of background about me, I really, really like history, science, and mysteries. So that really plays into the first book we're going to talk about today. This is The Museum Detective. It's by Maha Khan Phillips. It actually came out the 1st of April this year. And it is a true crime historical novel. So it is based on an actual crime that occurred in Pakistan in October of 2000. So the story follows the first female archaeologist at the Heritage and History Museum in Karachi, Pakistan. And she is the first woman who is working there. She has faced some discrimination against herself, but she is really into her career. Now, in the middle of the night, the story begins with her receiving a phone call. And it is from an inspector. And the inspector tells her he really needs to talk to her. Now, at first, Gull, who is the female archaeologist in the book, Gull is scared because her 16-year-old niece has been missing, and she's afraid it's about her niece. But as the inspector makes clear, it is not about her niece. It's something else, but he won't tell her exactly what it is. But he says, I'm sending somebody to come get you. So in about 45 minutes, a police officer shows up with a Jeep, puts her in the Jeep, and they drive for several hours to the territory of Balochistan in Pakistan. Now, this is right along the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan. It's a very lawless area, so you wouldn't go there unless you had a police escort. Once they get there, she finds out that she's there to see the scene of a drug bust. A very violent drug bust where they seized over 250 kilos of heroin. But that's not why she's there. With this same seizure of these drugs, they've also found a sarcophagus. Now, this sarcophagus, at first, she thinks it's Egyptian. That's what the police officer thinks it is too. But it turns out it's actually Persian. And the Persians were not known to practice mummification. So it's a very, very rare find. And if she can date it properly and get it out there, write papers about it, she knows that this will make her career. So this is a huge, huge thing for her. So the rest of the story follows Gull and her team as they are trying to figure out the origin of this mummy, how old it is, and how it got to be in a cave in Pakistan. Now, this is based on a true story. The true story is based on Asma Ibrahim, who was the first female archaeologist. Let's see, she was at the National Museum of Pakistan. So it's a little bit different name in reality. She gave it a slightly different name in the book. But this is actually what happened. She was called out to a crime scene. There was an actual sarcophagus there, and she was bringing in her team to try to figure out who this mummy is, when she lived, and how did it get there. Now, I don't want to tell you anything else about it because it will spoil the story, but it's super interesting, especially since it's based on real life. So it follows that entire process of them trying to figure out who is this, where did it come from. She's fighting with both the government of Pakistan and the government of Iran because it's Persian. The Iranians want it back. They think it's theirs. So it's a really, really great story. Very, very quick read. It flows really well. I strongly recommend it.
When did this take place?
This took place in October of 2000. And that's actually another thing that I found really interesting about it. It's on the border of Pakistan, not far from Islamabad, along the border with Afghanistan in October of 2000. What was the intention of this mummy? It was worth millions of dollars. What were they selling it for? Was this to finance terrorism? Was it to bring money into that region for other reasons? So it's a very, very interesting story. All right, thank you.
So the next book, we're back on American soil. And it traces slave times. So it's Good Dirt by Charmaine Wilkerson. You may be familiar with the author, Charmaine Wilkerson, from her first book, Black Cake, set in the Caribbean, the United Kingdom, and Southern California. Jenna Bush chose it as her book club pick, and Oprah produced a Hulu series based on the novel, which is very good if you haven't seen it. Wilkerson has now written an equally fine story set on American soil. It will satisfy those of you who like historical fiction, family sagas, and mystery. The title refers to the good soil, particularly for making clay into fine pottery that is in the South. And I know I have some really good everyday pottery china that I use that is from North Carolina. And they have big factories in North Carolina, but I never understood it was a hub. The main character in the present is Abby Freeman. Abby has been jilted by her fiance, who just leaves her at the altar. But years before this, when she was 10 years old, she was thrust into the public spotlight after a home invasion went terribly wrong and her brother was killed. Abby had to watch him die. This home invasion took more than her brother. A very treasured family heirloom, a large clay food storage jar, was shattered during the robbery. The jar linked the family's current life with that of a slave ancestor, a potter. The jar serves also as a literary device, allowing Wilkerson to travel back in time to South Carolina pre-Civil War through Reconstruction. When one of her slave characters escapes to freedom as a sailor on a tall ship docked at the Charleston port, she allows contemporary readers to look at yet another aspect of Black history, that of freed and enslaved seamen and their relationship to the mass production of pottery in 19th century South. I had no idea that slaves were used in the mass production of pottery at that time. You didn't either, Charlie, and you were very knowledgeable about that. Just as when I read Geraldine Brooks's book Horse, I didn't know that slaves were used as jockeys and tended to the horses, and that racing was a huge industry in the South. You know, we only think about crops and cotton crops, far more. The mystery in the book resides in who committed the heinous crime that took the life of Abby's brother. It's also about family secrets. Both Abby and her father suffer from survivor's guilt, and both carry with them secrets from that fateful day. And it hurts their family dynamics. Abby comes from a wonderfully loving home. And other than this trauma that happened to her, she's had a wonderful life. Her family is wealthy. They've given her the best education. She speaks French. And in fact, after she's jilted at the altar, she escapes to France, to this beautiful, and the setting is beautiful, this Parisian village. and she's helping with an inn where she again meets her jilted, the man who jilted her. So, who is now with another girlfriend. And there is humor in the book. There are also themes of how you can't really escape your past. And you can't run from it. You have to embrace it and find a way to positively work with it. Goodyer, I'm going to say Wilkerson being sensitive. Oh, this is really important. Charmaine Wilkerson's early career was as a television journalist. And if you watch her interview, she's very personal. She's very good looking. And she said that she would see people on the worst day of their life. And you've all seen television coverage of these reporters who are interviewing people who have gone through horrific things, and you're wondering, how can they do that? And how can the people talk to them at that point? So, but she, as a journalist, would walk away thinking, how are they going to deal with this trauma? And sometimes she would meet them again on the street, and she'd ask how they are, and they would frequently tell you good things that are happening in their life. And she filed that away, that people's desire to live often overrides the tragedy that they've encountered in their life. Good Dirt explores the theme of moving forward. One can't forget trauma, and you can't run from your past either. It will catch up with you, but you can draw lessons from it and possibly impart some lessons to others. In creating characters that do just that, Wilkerson demonstrates the power of words in rewriting a story. It's a very, very good book. I learned a lot from it. It's not horrific, and yet it does show you the treatment of slaves, but nothing was horrific. So that's Good Dirt. Which is beautiful cover, just like her first book had. Yeah, she uses the colors of black and well, she's Jamaican, so. My second book is also historical fiction, but it's, and again, mystery, but it also incorporates fantasy and magical realism. Very unusual to have all that in one book. I'm going to read some of this because it deals with Australian history, and I don't want to make an error. This is a perfect book for those who enjoy historical fiction with magical realism. It is the story of two sets of sisters in two time frames who are linked by a magical affinity to the sea. In 1788, this is all true, a fleet of 11 British ships landed in what was then known as New South Wales, which combined with later colonies became Australia in 1901. Over an 80-year time span, Great Britain sent thousands of convicts, most of whom were convicted for minor crimes or they weren't even given a trial. They were sent from Ireland and Great Britain to colonize the continent. Many had committed minor offenses like stealing a loaf of bread. Hart recreates this history in a fictional convict ship called the Naiad, carrying sisters Mary and Eliza from Ireland in 1788. They were arrested for trying to defend themselves from sexual violence of a landowner. Although they are afraid of water, it causes an eczema rash on them. But it has a strange pull on them, and here is where the magical realism comes in. As Mary and Eliza endure weeks on the ship, they notice inexplicable changes in their body, including webbing between their fingers and toes. Their skin becomes scaly. The conditions on the ship are appalling, mirroring those of the slave ships. Some of the scenes are very graphic, so I want to include trigger warnings for this book. I did find myself skipping forward. Also, the audio books on both of these, I read and listened to both audio books. The parallel story, set in 1999 and 2019, involves two sisters, Lucy and Jess, who are 16 years apart. They too share this allergy to water, yet are strangely drawn to it. When we first meet Lucy, she is a college student who wakes in the middle of a sleepwalking episode, attempting to strangle the boy she was dating. She shared, and this was stupid, but it's very contemporary, she shared a nude photo of herself with him, who he then shared with a couple of buddies, who then posted it on the internet. Horrified by what she's done, Lucy leaves school and she runs to her sister's house off the coast of New South Wales, a place called Comber Bay. Comber Bay is based on an actual bay where the author grew up. Comber Bay, specifically a cave called Devil's Lookout, is known for the place where 8 men have gone missing during the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Lucy's arrival is unexpected, and Jess, who's a surrealist artist, is missing, although her paintings stand expectantly waiting, along with her car and cell phone. So you know something has happened here. It's important to note that both the author and her character, Lucy, are true crime junkies, and they listen to podcasts all the time on true crime. So this is in the background, but it's because she's a true crime junkie that leads Lucy to, in a detailed way, to try to find her sister's whereabouts. And she stumbles upon her diary, which has shocking revelations that Lucy knew nothing about growing up with her. The author mentions that she had a personal reason for writing this book. One of her ancestors was a captain of a convict ship in which 60 men died in the hold. Like the captain of this ship, he too was more interested in transporting barrels of rum than caring for the people he was transported. So they were just crammed into the hold where disease and starvation and there were deaths. Hart also has Irish relatives who came to Australia as prisoners on the convict ship, so she had it both ways. The Sirens is a book combining multiple genres. Although historical fiction, it has many fantastic and mythological elements. It reads like true crime. In fact, the character Lucy and the author are true crime junkies, and Lucy's methodical research into Jess's former life helps her and the reader solve many mysteries surrounding them. Like a book, my last book that I'm going to talk about, The Sirens also touches on a predatory relationship of an adult male and a teenage girl and the long impact on that girl. Irish folklore about Merrow, or mermaids, and the Greek myth of the sirens in the Odyssey, along with 19th century Australian history, combine to make this a unique and gripping tale.
Hello, my name is Matthew, and my first book is the graphic novel Kosher Mafia. The year is 1936. Jesse Owens is winning the gold medal in Berlin. Hitler is more popular and seems more unstoppable than ever on the European continent. And Howard Berkowitz is a bookkeeper just trying to make the numbers work in his tiny little corner of Cleveland, Ohio. This is the world of Kosher Mafia, a new graphic novel from writer David Hazen and artist Sammy Cavalier. You see, Howard is not what you call a conventional bookkeeper. He may have an unassuming house on an unassuming Cleveland block, along with a rather meek exterior. His employer, however, is not a bank or a factory, but rather Cleveland's Jewish mafia, sometimes referred to in the book by the tongue-in-cheek moniker Kosher Nostra. It is a job Berkowitz has not been doing so well lately, however, leading to a visit from the chilling hitman Ephraim Gold. Beneath the nebbish appearance, however, Howard proves himself to be a much more formidable man than either Ephraim or you expect him to be. How does he talk his way out of a pair of cement shoes and an appointment with sleeping with the fishes? He simply convinces his executioner to instead team up and kidnap a member of the German-American Bund, a pro-Nazi organization dreaming of bringing Hitler's new order to American shores. What follows is a madcap, thrilling adventure involving car bombs, shootouts, fisticuffs, Italian mobsters, and everything you could ask for a pulpy tale named Kosher Mafia. It's kind of written and drawn in the style of the 1930s, sort of like EC Comics, matinee sort of thing, and it's done in this kind of like episodic way. I would almost consider it kind of like a gangster shootout version of Raiders of the Lost Ark, set in 1930s Cleveland. So whether you read a graphic novel before, never read one in your life, or just kind of a fan of like that time period, this kind of like fun take on historical thrillers, I highly recommend Kosher Mafia. Thank you.
All right, this might sound a little strange, but just bear with me here. What is it about an axe murder? They have captured our collective imagination, from Raskolnikov in Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, to the lurid tabloid stories of the yellow journalism era, to Jack Nicholson's Here's Johnny in the climax of The Shining. I bet if you think about it, you can find an axe murder, real or fictional, that might occupy some space in your mind. In the true crime history Whack Job, A History of Axe Murder, Rachel McCarthy James examines what it means, historically, socially, and culturally, when someone picks up a certain utilitarian tool and uses it as a murder weapon. For much of human history, an axe was something that people just had laying around. Therefore, if somebody picked one up and used it to kill, it was usually a crime of passion. But as the world urbanized and mechanized, axes and axe murders persisted. James looks at 13 notable episodes, ranging from the prehistoric era to the 21st century, to examine the why of axe murder. You'll learn about a hominid skull found in a prehistoric mass grave in Spain bearing telltale axe wounds. The owner of the skull died some 430,000 years ago, making axe murder older than the human species. Read about William Tillman, a free black man who was the cook on the S.J. Waring, a cargo ship that was seized by Confederate sailors in the early days of the Civil War. Knowing that he faced enslavement or worse upon southern shores, Tillman dispatched his captors with an axe, threw the bodies overboard, and sailed the ship back to Union territory where he was greeted as a hero. And of course, there's a chapter about the most famous alleged axe murderer of them all, Lizzie Borden. When her parents were found hacked to death in their fancy New England home in 1892, Lizzie was named the prime suspect. She was eventually acquitted, but the ensuing media circus and trial basically invented the true crime genre as we know it. These cases and the others in the book show how axe murder can be an expression of passion, authority, survival, or all too often, plain old criminal insanity. It may sound impossible, but James does a great job of balancing the grim subject matter with a breezy and curious tone. She joins the likes of Mary Roach, Mark Kurlansky, and Simon Winchester as a nonfiction writer who can take a subject you've never given much mind to and spin it into an illuminating and engaging read. Fans of those authors should take note, and true crime readers will get a kick out of the various cases presented in the book. Whack Job comes out next week and will be available from the Glencoe Library.
We have a theme going here. So this book is also true crime. It's nonfiction. It's called The Story of a Murder, and it's by Hallie Rubenhold. It actually came out on March 25th of this year, and it's a really in-depth true crime book. Now, if anybody here read Thunderstruck by Eric Larson, this is the same crime that is discussed in that book. This is the crime of Hawley Henry Crippen, and what happened when his wife disappeared. This, however, goes into significantly more detail about the people involved in that crime, the trial, and the outcome after the crime. So this story about Dr. Crippen and his wife became sensationalized. It was international news. It was the original crime of the century or trial of the century. The reason why it became so popular and was so well known is because the wireless radio had recently been invented. So people around the world could find out what happened today in that trial every single day. And people were obsessed. They were really, really tied to what was happening, personally invested in it. And it really held everyone's attention for the several weeks that he was on trial. Now, I want to give you a little bit of background on our characters. And I will tell you in the front of this book, there's a really nice list. They list it as a cast of characters. Again, it's nonfiction, but they give you a really nice breakdown of who everyone is, because there's a lot of people involved in this. So Dr. Crippen, in a lot of the histories at the time and contemporary newspaper articles at the time, he is portrayed as being a meek little bespectacled man who couldn't hurt a fly. And the press at the time and society at the time kind of ate that up because his wife was flamboyant, she was outspoken, and what man could possibly tolerate a wife like that? So she was kind of besmirched in the media, and he was held up as being, he really couldn't hurt anybody. His actual history, though, is somewhat darker. He was born in Michigan in 1862, and later on he trained as a naturopathic doctor. So he was a little less than an MD, but was a doctor. He just focused more on natural cures for things that might be ailing somebody. So it actually, he did have the moniker of doctor, but he was married to his first wife, Charlotte, and Charlotte died while she was pregnant with their second child. She had a sudden stroke. She was only 31. And when he notified her family that she had died, her family really didn't trust him. They didn't believe it because Charlotte had told them before that he abused her and that if she were to end up dead, that he's the one who did it. So her family and friends knew this. Her neighbors knew that he had beaten her at times because they had seen him do it. The neighbors and everybody really didn't like this situation. However, the authorities believed him that it was a stroke and they closed the case. So Crippen had Charlotte cremated and buried in California and would never tell anyone in his family or her family where he buried her. So they did have one child, though. His name was Hawley Otto Crippen, and he sent Hawley Otto off to California to live with his parents and never saw him again. So he didn't really like children very much. So after all of this happened, Crippen moved back to New York City, where he had lived earlier in his life, and he met a woman named Belle. Now, Belle was actually called Cora by her family. She actually has several names, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But she went by Cora when she was younger. She became Belle Elmore when she was on the stage, because she ended up being a performer. But they met and married in 1894 in New York City. He was 11 years older than her. She wanted children, and he did not. So she became pregnant once, and he insisted that she have an abortion. Forced her to do it, and he did it himself. Then, when she was, after that entire process, he convinced her that she had medical problems, that she had a prolapsed uterus, and that she needed to have surgery for it. He attended the surgery along with another doctor, and while she was under, he sterilized her. So she could never have children. And this really affected her because she really wanted a family. That was one of the things she really, really wanted. So she ended up having severe physical scarring. She had major health issues afterwards. She had a lot of weight gain. She experienced depression. And a lot of that was used to kind of color her as not being a suitable wife later on. So the Crippens moved frequently around the United States. Dr. Crippen would frequently go to places like down in Tennessee or in Kentucky or St. Louis for new jobs, but would suddenly come back under mysterious circumstances, not tell anybody what happened. So his reputation was really falling within the United States. So they decided to move to London. When they moved to London, Cora changed her name to Belle. She became the performer Belle Elmore. And Dr. Crippen began selling miracle cures. He was a snake oil salesman. And he began peddling this. He was involved in several lawsuits where the miracle cures had actually harmed someone. So he kept changing the name of his company over and over again. Now, Belle, as she was known in London, was born Kunigund Makamasky in New York City in 1873. I had to look up that name several times to figure out how to say it. But she was originally known as Cora Turner. That was the name she grew up with, but then she changed her name to Belle when she moved to London. Now, Dr. Crippen and her family still called her Cora, but all of her friends and everyone else knew her as Belle. So when you hear about this crime, it's always Belle Elmore is the name that they use. So while she wasn't superstar material, Belle was moderately talented. She had moderate success on the stage. What she was very successful at was cultivating a very large group of friends. She ended up being very popular amongst her fellow actors and actresses. She had a very tight group of friends that really cared about her, and she really cared about them. She volunteered with different theater organizations and really had made a name for herself that way. Now, the family, Belle and Dr. Crippen, would frequently host parties at their house. They would go to events together. Everybody thought that they were happily married. They never saw them really arguing with each other. They knew that Belle was kind of flamboyant and she was outspoken, but she was hardly somebody that would be screaming at her husband on a regular basis. So while this is happening with her large, bubbly personality, she actually disappears. And at first, her husband is telling everyone, I don't know what happened to her. And then he said, oh, she went to America. She's taken a trip to America. And then it became, oh, she's left me and she's gone to America. Her friends didn't believe this. Her friends kept pressuring him and saying, where is she? Where is she? The straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, is that her friends saw his new mistress wearing all of her jewelry that she would have never left behind if she was leaving him. So that spurs them to go to the courts, to go to the authorities and say something isn't right here. They still didn't act until later on when a man came and told them, something's going on here. We think you need to look into this. So that's really where this all starts and finishes. The crime itself, though, is really dissected. The personalities of the people involved are dissected. This is a really interesting read. Now, I will give you a little bit of a trigger warning. There is some crime that happens in here. It can be a little bit disturbing, but the way that this is brought out that Belle was not the horrid person that she was portrayed as in court or in the media is really eye-opening, and it's very refreshing. Thank you.
So one of the, I guess, big parts of my personality is that I'm a, giant nerd, I guess is the right word, for the Titanic thinking. I've read most of what's been written about the disaster. I have a reproduction of the final photograph of the ship taken hanging in my den in my house, as well as a full-size poster of the 1997 James Cameron film as well. So I think I'm on solid ground in saying that after 113 years of books, paintings, songs, plays, musicals, documentaries, and one classic billion-dollar film, you'd think that everything there was to be said and discovered about the Titanic, the most famous maritime disaster in history, had already been said or discovered at some point in the past century and some change. Amazingly, author Stephen Schwanger has managed to do just that in his new book, The Six, The Untold Story of Titanic's Chinese Survivors. Of 2,224 passengers on board Titanic, 8 were Chinese nationals bound for New York, where they were contracted to work as sailors for the Donald steamship line, who were also paying their fare across the Atlantic. While much ink has been spilled over the years on Titanic's more well-known denizens, John Jacob Astor, Molly Brown, Isidore and Ida Strauss, Captain Smith, and so on. The story of these 8 men, 6 of whom survived the sinking, has received scant attention from most accounts of that night. The 6-track Schwankert's attempts to rectify this historical oversight, detailing a journey through dusty archives across 3 different continents that shed light on the identity of these 6 heretofore anonymous men. His discoveries, which include some Chicago-based relatives of one of the survivors, I might add, are shocking enough that I wouldn't want to spoil it for the uninitiated. What I will say, however, is that in discovering who these men were, Schwanker gives a reader a primer on the China of 1912, where these men came from, a declining power divided internally and being carved up by acquisitive foreign powers, as well as the America of the late 19th and early 20th century, in particular the pervasive xenophobia and anti-Chinese racism that defined its immigration policy. As Chinese nationals were banned from permanently entering the country under the Chinese Exclusion Act, the Titanic's Chinese passengers were meant to get off one boat, transfer to Ellis Island, and get on another to work their way down the coast of the Americas. In fact, to make sure they did so, agents of the so-called Chinese Bureau, the Treasury Department, were in New York Harbor waiting to make sure these 6 survivors did just that. While most of Titanic survivors were greeted by family, reporters, or charitable aid societies offering what they could to help, the only one waiting for these 6 men were those making sure they went as far away from the United States as soon as possible. In fact, as the 6 documents, when not busy ignoring them, the only contemporary journalistic account offered by the press of these men's survival stories were outright lies, claiming they dressed as women or to get on board a lifeboat or shove other passengers aside to save themselves. If the 6 is anything, it's a welcome humanization and correction to the baseless and frankly racist slander these men were subjected to in 1912. One of the more extraordinary scenes in the 6 is the account of Feng Wing Sung, who amazingly enough was one of only a handful of passengers who were actually pulled out of the water alive on that freezing April evening. Is a scene that was actually meant to be depicted in a James Cameron film and was actually shot. You can see it on YouTube if you would like. It was in a depressingly symbolic move, unfortunately cut from the final version of the film. The 6 will make sure this story is never cut again from our understanding of what happened on the night of April 15th, 1912. The book itself is actually an adaptation of a documentary the author made a couple years ago. So if you end up liking the book or just are interested in the story in general, I'd also highly recommend kind of watching that alongside reading it. The 6 is now available at the Lincoln Public Library, and I really hope you read it. Thank you.
Move on to our next section. I'll see you at the movies, which is books about mass media. Stop me if you've heard this one before. Back in the 80s, in a suburb in Oregon, or maybe it was Pennsylvania, it doesn't matter. The arcade got a new game that nobody had ever heard of called Polybius. People who played it got addicted, and then they started attacking each other. Turns out it was a top secret government mind control project. The story of an insanity-inducing arcade game isn't real. It's an urban legend that emerged in the 1990s, but it forms the basis for Polybius, the debut novel from Colin Armstrong. It's 1982, and Tasker Bay, California, is a sleepy little drinking town with a fishing problem. Nothing much ever happens, though the town is undergoing a bit of an identity crisis due to gentrification from nearby Silicon Valley. One day, the local arcade receives a new attraction that was salvaged from a now defunct tech startup in San Jose. Nobody has ever heard of the game called Polybius, but gamers can't get enough of the cutting-edge graphics and gameplay. Teens are lining up out the door and around the corner just to get a taste, even going so far as to try to break into the arcade after hours. But then, things start getting weird. The teens who play Polybius are acting irritable, hallucinating, and even getting in fights at school. People go missing or show up with inexplicable injuries. Rachel Winston is a doctor who starts tending to the mood swings and injuries. David Kemp is the local sheriff investigating the goings-on about town. Dr. Winston's daughter is Andy, a teenage tech whiz and part-time employee at the arcade. Sheriff Kemp's son is Roman, a friend and classmate of Andy's. Andy realizes that the town started to lose its collective mind just after Polybius showed up, and she doesn't think it's a coincidence. She and Roman travel to nearby San Jose to investigate the mystery. while their parents stay in town to tend to the chaos. But a freak storm is cutting off Tasker Bay from the outside world, and back in town, the violence is growing more unpredictable and widespread. Will they be able to uncover the truth before it's too late? At the start of the novel, before things turn grisly, we get to learn a lot about the small town and the people who call it home. It's like reading a Stephen King novel, only one that's set in Northern California instead of Maine. And then once groups of teens and adults start doing parallel investigations into a high-tech conspiracy, it's like the show Stranger Things. Now, there is a little blurb on the cover that says, if you're a fan of Stephen King and Stranger Things, this book is for you. I read an advanced version of this book that didn't have that quote on the front, and that was what I was thinking. Oh, Stephen King, Stranger Things. For fans of them, it would be great. Also great for fans of horror, high-tech conspiracies, and 80s nostalgia. It came out last week and is available from the Glencoe Library. We're going to move on to music next with my final pick, Deep Cuts, which is the debut novel from Holly Brickley. Deep Cuts follows the creative and personal relationship between an aspiring indie rock musician and a musical opinion haver. Set to a period-appropriate soundtrack, these young people navigate life and love during the first 8 years of the 21st century. In the fall of the year 2000, Eileen Marks, who goes by Percy, meets singer-songwriter Joe Morrow in a Berkeley bar. The two undergrads start talking music, and he gives her a burned disc with a track he's been working on. She punches up the structure and some lyrics, and a partnership is born. From there, we drop in on Percy and Joe throughout the decade. Percy and Joe process the events of 9/11 from her bedroom. Percy pursues an MFA at Columbia, while Joe's band, Caroline, releases its first album and goes on tour. Percy moves to San Francisco for a corporate day job and a side gig blogging about music, while Caroline's star rises, and Joe becomes somewhat of a rock star. Their paths keep on crossing, but despite their mutual attraction and shared history, a romantic relationship is always just out of the question. Existing partners, distance, and shifting priorities keep the pair from getting what they really want. Eventually, allegations of plagiarized lyrics and bruised egos threaten to torpedo their relationship. With the threat of a Great Recession looming, will Percy and Joe be able to rekindle what they once had? More importantly, should they? I love Deep Cuts because it took me back. Like the characters in this book, I spent my 20s in the 2000s going to shows and gabbing about music in crummy off-campus housing and dive bars. Brickley must have done the same. She must have spent her 20s the same way because she absolutely nails the atmosphere of the era. But what if you don't see yourself in the book? Will you still like it even if you can't tell the Shins from the Strokes? I think so, and here's why. I know how popular Gabrielle Zevin's Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow was, even among people who don't know the first thing about video games. I know how popular Taylor Jenkins Reid's Daisy Jones and the Six was, even among people who aren't into 70s rock music. The characters, their growth, and their relationships were what kept us reading those books. Deep Cuts is the same way. We get fully realized characters, glimpses into the inner workings of a creative partnership, and a will-they-won't-they plot. The music amounts to some bonus tracks at the end of an album. They're not necessary for enjoying the whole thing, but they're a real treat for the fans. Deep Cuts came out in February, and it's available from the Glencoe Library.
My final book is Ed Wood, Made in Hollywood, USA, from author Will Sloan. If you ever heard of Ed Wood, it's probably for one of two reasons. You either know he's widely regarded as the worst film director of all time, the maker of anti-classics such as Plan 9 from Outer Space, Glenn or Glenda, and Bride of the Monster. Or you saw Tim Burton's 1994 loving but sanitized tribute to Wood's life, the conveniently titled biopic, Ed Wood, starring Johnny Depp, Sarah Jessica Parker, and Martin Landau. Both of these points of entry, however, can't give you a full appreciation of one of mid-20th century America's most eclectic auteurs, at least not according to Canadian film critic and podcaster Will Sloan, author of this book. Part biography, part critical retrospective, Sloan does what neither Wood's early detractors nor his latter-day supportive but ultimately dismissively ironic fans have deigned to do. He takes Wood seriously, both as an artist and as a human being. Wood's life is presented warts and all, from the seemingly but not entirely idyllic all-American childhood in upstate New York, where Wood fell in love with the B-movies, pulp novels, and comic books that would form the basis of his artistic outlook. His service in the Second World War, much exaggerated on Wood's part, unsurprisingly. His initial creative work as a commercial director, his friendship and fruitful creative partnership with the original Dracula, Bela Lugosi, as well as his famous, if widely misunderstood, penchant for cross-dressing, his transition from film to writing what could politely be described as lurid fiction, and his eventual decline into alcoholism and early death at the age of 54. In between the biographies, Sloan offers a new critical analysis of Wood's work, presenting him as a maverick artist who's truly ad oeuvre, pushed beyond staid Eisenhower-era conventions of narrative form, gender roles, and certainly whatever constituted good taste. Sloan's is a warm voice to guide a reader through such an analysis, and readers should find Made in Hollywood, USA an easy and entertaining, if unusual read, much like an Ed Wood film, if I do say so myself. If you're a film aficionado or just have a soft spot for the artistic underdog, I would highly recommend giving Ed Wood Made in Hollywood, USA a shot. You might just come away viewing the worst film director of all time, both as exactly that, and so much more than that title could ever possibly convey. This book will be available at the Glencoe Public Library starting on June 10th, and I certainly hope you read it. Thank you.
My last book is a fiction title, and this one is called That Devil Ambition. And the title really is saying that ambition can be a devil in your life. This is by Lindsay Miller. It actually comes out June 2nd of this year, and we will have it in our collection at that time. But it's a supernatural fantasy thriller set in an academic environment. And I know that makes everybody immediately think of Harry Potter. It is somewhat similar to Harry Potter in the sense that, yes, it is in a school, and yes, it features people who have magical powers. Beyond that, though, it is not a Harry Potter knockoff. This is a much more mature, dark. Think about the final Harry Potter books, how those kind of got darker in theme as time went on. This one is darker in theme from the start. And it features students that are not actually given an age, but what you can tell from them is they are seniors at their school. So they are likely 18, 19, 20, somewhere in that range. So while this story feels like it could be from a past world or even a current world, it's actually set in the future. And it's in the future after a great war. Now, I'm not talking about World War I. This is a different war. It's a war where humanity was almost completely wiped out. Everybody across the entire planet were fighting each other, and this inherent evil allowed underworld creatures, malevolent creatures, to come out and be part of the human world. It also allowed humans to discover their innate magical ability, and some of those most powerful humans with magical abilities were able to send the demons and underworld creatures back down to the underworld. But now, magicians are considered coveted. They are people that you want on your side. So each territory within this world that we'll be discussing wants their own magicians. They have them, but they want more. Having more magicians means you have more power. Now that brings us to the school that we're going to be talking about. Fabian Galloway is a student at this school. It's called the Stellarium, and it is the most important magical school in the entire planet. And Fabian comes from a town called Galloway in the territory of Sifra. Now, the town of Galloway is named after his ancestors. His family was very wealthy and powerful previously, but now the family wealth and power has been squandered, particularly by his mother, who has squandered that wealth in unspeakable ways. Now, he's the top of his class at the Stellarium. Fabian is the person to kind of beat if you're competing with other students. And he is there because he needs to prove himself. He wants to get his family's good name back. He wants to be able to say that he's the most powerful magician there. So on his way to fight to get to the Stellarium, he had to take out a loan to be able to go to this school. And the loan, he had no money, he had nothing to secure it except for his good family name. So the loan is secured by his mother's life. If he fails, his mother's life is forfeit. And if he fails, his mother will have to not be here anymore, and the money has to be repaid by someone. The school's not cheap. They say that it's like $150,000 equivalent. So this is a really big undertaking that he's doing. Now, Fabian is one of 13 students, all seniors, that are joining the honors course in their final year at the Stellarium. Now, the honors course is something that only a select few are allowed to undertake. And the reason is that the honors course has a very unusual assignment. So all of the kids that have joined this class, they all have something to prove. They all either have to prove something to their families, to themselves, to their territory that they live in. They all want to prove something. So successfully completing the honors course means that graduates will get a place immediately as an honor roll magician in the government and in society. And it also means that their tuition and loans will automatically be paid back for them. So passing this class is huge. If you pass it, it means you don't have to pay anyone back, and you are immediately one of the most powerful people in society. So they all want to be able to do this. So now Fabian has to succeed and graduate in order to get his loan forgiven. Now, this honors course has one assignment for the year. That assignment is they have to kill their teacher before he kills them. That's how the class has to end. It's either going to be that the students will be there or the teacher will be there at the end. So they are sent into the underworld with one of their other professors to retrieve the teacher for this honors course. And what they bring back is somebody that they only refer to as the professor, but he makes it very clear to them right from the beginning that he is an immortal demon. He cannot be killed. So their task ahead of themselves is impossible. How do you kill the unkillable? And this is where ambition becomes a real theme throughout this book. Each of these students has something that they need to prove. Each of them has something that they need to be able to say, I did this in order to feel good about themselves and take their place in society. The professor, even though he's technically a demon, is very charismatic. He's actually very encouraging to many of the students. Some of them will go and talk to him at different times. But he also will kind of give little hints that he doesn't believe that anybody can solve this problem, that anybody can go through this class. So as the story goes through, Fabian has his point of view. There's another student that he's very good friends with named Credence. We also get her point of view. And then Fabian's very best friend in the whole world is Mia, and we also get her point of view. And we'll see the students form alliances with each other, try to figure out how they're going to solve an unsolvable problem. And some of them will let their ambition get ahead of them. Their ambition will end up being their undoing. It's a really, really interesting read. If you did enjoy Harry Potter, I would suggest reading this one. Again, we're going to have it in our collection on June 2nd. While it is, again, a little bit darker, there are people that die in this book. It is also a really interesting study of just how far anyone is willing to go to succeed, and how that can be supported sometimes by the institutions within our world, by the government, by actual academic institutions. It can be a little bit of a condemnation of that. But I strongly recommend reading it. It was a fast read. I got through it in one day. So it was very engrossing. It was not something that I wanted to put down. So thank you.
Final book is Rabbit Moon by Jennifer Haig. Before I talk about this one, which is about the setting is contemporary Shanghai, I'm reading this one, which is about China. It's called Home Seeking Carissa Chen. Both of these deal with China. It just happened that way. In fact, Clarice Middleman, who left, I had given this to her for a trip, and she said, this was fantastic, so you have to read it. So I am reading it now, and the two tie in. this deals with China. It's over 6 decades, but primarily the 40s and 50s, when Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong, when you had this horrible civil war and the impact on those people who lived in Shanghai. And it's a book about star-crossed lovers, but it's just so meaningful because I keep looking up the history of that period. So I really can't say enough about this book. But that brings me to a book set in contemporary Shanghai, very, very different from what it once was. Rabbit Moon is a family drama in which modern day Shanghai is as much a character as the human characters in this book. It is both gritty and shocking, highlighting a very dark side of this urban metropolis. Having lived there for 3 months on a writer's residence, Haig describes rush hour at a busy intersection. In quotes, "The volume of pedestrians is staggering. Chinese of all ages on their way somewhere. They stand shoulder to shoulder, close enough to smell one another. Perfume and mouthwash, cigarettes and garlic. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the heat is already sickening." Within its opening pages, the narrator, brusque and factual, zooms onto a deserted street at 4 a.m. in the financial district of Shanghai. We, the reader, witness a beautiful young woman with flaming red hair struck by a hit-and-run driver. She lies unconscious on the road. She is then found by a street cleaner who calls an ambulance, but not before he slips her cell phone into his pocket. The unavailability of a contact list, along with Lindsay's sterile apartment, make solving the crime quite difficult. In an interview, Haig also talks about how she had many near misses there. You have bicycles, pedestrians, traffic, no one's obeying the traffic light. She said, the picture she paints is not one in which I want to particularly go there, although I know it's a fascinating city. Although Rabbit Moon is not a police procedural, so we have this whole theme, the book news, murder, crime. This book, a crime wasn't committed, it was an accident. But it definitely has elements of the police procedural. The chapters go back and forth in time and between points of view, investigating how Lindsay arrived at that fateful moment and how her accident affected the people in her life. It also gives the backstory of how Lindsay ended up in Shanghai. The characters in this book are all engaging. Claire is her mom, a woman who always wanted to write the great American novel but never could. She is also a spiritual seeker. Aaron, the father, a prominent Jewish businessman he has little time to spend at home, and he wasn't that significant in the family's life growing up. Grace, the much younger, adopted sister, and she was adopted from Shanghai. She's marooned at a Quaker camp all summer, considering Lindsay's accident. She and Lindsay are very, very close. Grace is a very interesting character in the book, who initially is just a side character. She's marooned on this camp. She hates it. There is some comic relief at the camp because they are not brought up with any religion, these two girls, and yet the mother's spiritual seeking makes her put this child in a Quaker camp. And her cell phone is taken also, so she can't converse with her sister. But she's the first one to realize something is wrong. I haven't heard from her. in a whole week when she finally gets her cell phone back. There's also a character of June or Johnny, a gay hairdresser who is Lindsay's best friend in Shanghai. And that character is modeled on someone that the author met. It's where the author lived. This apartment had a hairdressing salon on the same floor, and that's very common in Shanghai. And she would meet this character, and he was strangely androgynous, and she built this whole pretty much a main character out of this guy June. Like Good Dirt, Rabbit Moon examines how people cope with a traumatic event and how the very human desire to move ahead helps one come to terms with our circumstances. There are some trigger warnings. The topic of sexual exploitation and its impact on a teenage girl are examined. Something that looms large in this book, there's a family friend, a man, who grooms Lindsay for an affair. She is his babysitter. He is a family friend. And the book deals largely with the impact of this affair on her, because she's only 16. The age of consent in Massachusetts is truly 16, which sounds unbelievable, but it is. So the parents, her parents, differ on how to deal with this when it's discovered that she's having this affair. And that causes a huge rift in their marriage. The father, being a businessman, feels, well, legally we can't do anything, but the mother wants to do everything in her power to expose him because he's a predator. Fast forward to her, she drops out of college, and what she does in China directly results from this experience. And it's a really interesting exploration of a young girl and her coming of age and how a trauma can impact that. But also how trauma works on a whole family and how they all deal with it differently. It's a beautifully written book. I love this book. And it's really fast-paced. It does read like a true crime. Each chapter ends, you want to, well, what's going to happen next? So I really recommend it. This is the art. We have the book. It's out. So I think you'll all enjoy it. This concludes our program. I want to thank everyone for coming. Be sure to sign up for our e-newsletter, because I know a lot of people here found out about this through the e-blast that happen every week that tells you what we're doing. So thank you so much for coming.